손님 여러분, 우리 비행기는 인천국제공항에 도착했습니다.
Attention passengers.
You are listening to the Asian Investor Podcast. I am your host, Baby Kim. Each week, I'm joined by the fund manager of leading venture capital and private equity, corporate investors, and angel investor from Asia. Today's guest is Namsun Kim, Senior Vice President and Head of Corporate Business Development and Strategy Investment at Korea's number one tech and digital giant, Naver Group.
It just does not matter at all. So Naver, if you think about it, our CEO is a woman, which means that two of the C-suite are women. Our general counsel is a woman. The head of our largest division, which is our e-commerce division, is a woman. So more than half of the top 10 executives are women. But the more interesting part of it is that no one realizes that. It just isn't important. It just doesn't cross anyone's mind. And so I think that's the strength. Yeah.
Yes, I feel the same way. If people talk about gender inclusion, diversity, or racial inclusion, which means that they have a lot of problem, right?
Exactly. Anyone who emphasizes it means it's not working for them.
Yeah, it's not working. Yeah, you're right. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So I saw your profile. You look very interesting. You seems have bounced around many disciplines before joining Korean digital and tech giant.
That's right.
Yeah. How did it happen? So do you plan to prove every sector, every industry about your adaptability or something? What is the reason behind that?
I actually think my career trajectory isn't so unusual from at least from a U.S. perspective. You have many people who start out in corporate law and transition into finance, or who start out in investment banking and transition into the corporate sector. And I guess in Korea it's a little bit more unusual, but
right.
In the U.S. it's quite common.
Right. Yeah, I worked with the U.S. company a long time, almost 10 years. General Electric. I work with my colleague and friends in U.S. and Europe. But yeah, you're right. I mean, some people studied as a lawyer, then they move to the private equity fund, and that's not unusual. But I think you are much more than those people. You studied as a when I introduced the Naver company you're working at now, then I usually say that is a Korean version of Google. What do you think about that comparison?
Well, I think that used to be correct as of maybe 6 or 7 years ago. I think today it's become quite more than that, in that it started as a search engine, the dominant search engine, and Naver today is doing things that so much more than what Google was able to do, I think. For example, Naver has become the leader in e-commerce in Korea, which Google to date has not yet been able to figure out.
Right.
And even some of the digital content businesses that Naver is in today, those are also things that Google, while it's a much larger company, isn't quite as diverse in terms of the different business streams that Naver is in today.
I agree with you. Yeah, my impression, I didn't check all the business those two companies are running now, but my impression is that Naver is much more diversified than Google in terms of business. Also, I saw that you served in the army as a Katusa, right?
That's right. I spent my earlier, my younger and adolescent and college years in Korea, so naturally served in the military as well.
Right. I served in the Katusa as well in 1988 during the Seoul Olympic time.
It must have been an interesting time.
Right. So Katusa stands for the...
Right, it's Korean augmentation to the U.S. Army.
Right. I remember that. Mm-hmm. But do you think that makes sense to the native English speaker? Do they understand what that means?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's not so.
Literally correct. Literally,
Right,
that's
right.
right. But I usually say that liaison officer dispatched to the U.S. Army. Easier. I think sometimes people don't understand what that means, right?
I agree.
You have a unique background. Studied material engineering at the Seoul National University, and then studied law at the Harvard, and practice as a lawyer and work as a Wall Street investment bank, and ended up working at the Korea's #1 internet tech giant. What do you think will be end of your story? So would you like to start off telling us a little bit about your background and your journey to the Naver?
Sure. So, I was born in the U.S. Because my parents were studying there at the time, and came back to Korea when I was right around the Olympics when you were serving in the military, I guess. And then went through my formative education here in Korea through college, and then went back to the U.S. for law school, and just naturally ended up beginning my career at a law firm, only because at the time I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And having gone to college in Korea, at the time I thought the easiest way to get into the workforce in the US was through some sort of a professional role, which law school seemed to be kind of one of the more flexible and generalist careers that I could think about at the time. And so that's what happened. I started my first few years at a law firm and quickly realized that the finance side, kind of the investment banking side of the world, might be much more interesting for me, because all of the deals that, if you're at a corporate law firm in New York, it's similar to Korea, but all of the deals you work on, whether it's an M&A advisory role, or whether it's an equity underwriting or a debt underwriting, you work alongside bankers, you work for corporations, and you work for private equity clients. So it's natural that a lot of the lawyers, younger lawyers who are more interested kind of on the deal side, the financial side, are attracted to that side of Wall Street. And so I also made the jump. It wasn't easy because, when I first started practicing law, it was 2007, and the credit crunch came really, really fast. Right?
Yes.
And then Lehman came, and Wall Street was laying off just entire teams at a time. My clients, I remember, I used to be working with a team at Credit Suisse, and that whole team, the whole sponsor coverage team was laid off in one day. And so then I thought, hey, look, my chances of moving to the banking side don't look so great all of a sudden. So I spent a few years at a law firm. But by 2010, Wall Street in New York had laid off too many people, and all of a sudden had to hire lots of people, and they didn't want to hire the people that they just laid off, right? And so they started looking at, ex-lawyers or ex-accountants, and that's how I kind of used my network, the alumni of the former law firm I used to work at, and the alumni of the law school I went to at Harvard, helped me find a position at Lazard in New York. And that's kind of how I started my investment banking career. Then I moved back to Korea, switched to a bulge bracket bank, Morgan Stanley, spent some time both in Seoul and Hong Kong, before ending. I also always wanted to go to the buy side. I didn't want to spend the rest of my career in advisory, especially on the sell side, in a sell side banker role, because I just felt it wasn't as intriguing, or you're never the principal making decisions. And so Macquarie at the time was looking to hire someone in Korea, and I kind of went there to start up and lead their private equity practice. Spent a few years doing that, invested in a few mega deals at the time. It was 2018, 2019. I had deployed about $1 billion of equity over 2 years, and then sometime last year, Naver used to be an old client of mine when I was at Morgan Stanley, and I had known the people. I had helped them IPO Line, their subsidiary in Japan. I had helped them IPO that in 2016. And so, an old relationship just ended up asking me to they asked if I wanted to come and kind of lead up their corporate development / strategic investment / M&A initiative.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought it was, I thought it just kind of, I had never thought about something like that, but it just was too good to be true, right? And joining, the third largest company by market cap in Korea, the first startup in Korean history, and probably one of the most innovative companies in the world at the time. They were seeking to expand offshore. They were seeking to get into new businesses. They realized that they needed to grow inorganically and think about M&A. And it just was kind of a very, very attractive opportunity at the time. And so I said, why not? And here I am.
Yes. Yeah. I'm familiar with that story. Actually, I had the same situation when I worked for the Korean Development Bank. I tried to raise the money from the General Electric during the, crisis, and then I failed to close the deal. But they bought me, so that's the way I joined the General Electric. In fact,
What year was that?
2003. I joined the 2003. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so they had a very large business in Korea, right? They were in healthcare, they were in energy, they were in real
G
estate.
Capital. I work for the
Finance.
my
Right.
professional background has been in the finance investment all the time.
Right.
So I joined the G Capital.
Right. And they were a huge investor in Asia throughout
Right.
the 2000s.
And also they made a lot of money during the Asian financial crisis. They
Right.
set up the joint venture together with the Goldman Sachs, I think,
Mhm.
and some other firm as well. So they made a huge investment in Thailand, and they moved to Korea and other part of the Asia with the distress asset investment model. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So everybody knows, every Korean knows Naver. I mean, what Naver does, and also it's a messenger app, the Line. But since we have audience from other part of Asia, and also I'm covering the Africa for another podcast, CEO Roundtable. So for those who are not familiar with the Naver Group, would you like to introduce a little bit about the Naver and Line? I found that interestingly, many people outside of Korea still don't know the Line is a Korean company and a part of the Naver.
Right. So Naver is it's about a $60 billion company in terms of market capitalization. It's Korea's it's a top 5 company by size in Korea. It was also probably the first startup founded in 1999. It started as a search engine. It became the dominant search engine in Korea. It still is. It still has market share of 70%, which is probably one of only 2 countries in the world where Google doesn't dominate. But it grew beyond that, and now so it still has a very solid search business where advertising revenue is a very big and important part of our revenue. But it quickly moved into, over the past 5 years, e-commerce. And today, Naver is Korea's largest e-commerce channel. So Korea is, I think it's the world's 4th largest e-commerce market. Last year, the total GMV was about 130 billion. And Naver's 25 billion of GMV crosses Naver every year. So last year, that was about a 15% market share in Korea's largest e-commerce channel. Coupang is a very, very close number 2 in Korea. And then you have eBay Korea and the smaller platforms. And so e-commerce is something that Naver had figured out how to do early on, where Google still hasn't figured out how to build a shopping platform. And beyond that, so also it was right around the same time, maybe even a little bit earlier, Naver had started to invest into and started building various online and mobile applications. And Line was one of them, where Line was a messaging app. Didn't really kick off in Korea, but in Japan, it's the dominant messaging app in Japan with over, I'm going to say in Japan alone, there's over
Japan and Thailand and Taiwan are very dominant app in those markets, right?
That's right. So globally, there's about more than 150 million users, monthly average users. I want to say at least, close to 100 million in Japan alone. And so it's the Kakao of Japan. And so that was a very important business that Naver had built early on.
I thought I thought the Naver intend to focus on the market outside of Korea, in order to avoid the unnecessary competition in the small local market. It's not intended a strategy.
Well, that was also an intent. That was also definitely intent. I think it was way before I joined Naver. I think what they had thought at the time was that, at the time, Kakao had not figured out how to monetize. And so I think the thinking at the time was that Korea was a limited market. You have the big telecom carriers who are giving basically free messaging anyway. And so how could this ever, result in revenue? And so they focused more on Japan and Southeast Asia, which I think was at the time was the right decision.
Yeah, Brett, I thought it's a brilliant idea.
That's right. That's right. And so today, beyond Line, today I want to highlight that the other most noteworthy part of our business is digital content. Webtoons being the biggest. So Naver Webtoons, Naver had actually invented the concept of the Webtoon, which is basically a web comic, a new kind of mobile format for web comics. And today, Naver Webtoons has more than 70 million global monthly users. And the interesting thing is that there's more than 10 million users in North America alone. And this is the fascinating part. No one ever thought that Korean Webtoons would ever gain traction in the United States. And so Korea is the largest Webtoon market for Naver. Japan is the second largest, and then the third is the United States, and the United States is growing the fastest.
That's very interesting.
It's a very exciting time.
Very exciting, interesting.
Right. So Kakao also is our competitor in terms of Webtoons in Korea and Japan, but they don't have a North American business. They don't have a meaningful presence there. So that's, I think, a big distinguisher. So you can think of Naver more as, I like to make the analogy that Naver is more like an Alibaba, where Kakao is more like a Tencent. Naver is more about kind of commerce, marketplace. We also have search and kind of the broader platform strategy, whereas Kakao, focused more on, the Korea messaging app. They focused more on trying to build an entertainment business, kind of like Tencent, and Naver has all of those applications and businesses too. We have the fourth and fifth largest music streaming business in Korea too, but the focus definitely is more on search, commerce, and a few applications like Line and Webtoons.
Right. Yeah. From today on, I'll explain to the non-Korean about a Naver. I'll say that Alibaba and WhatsApp, Google all combined. That's Naver, right?
That's right. That's right. Exactly right.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Also, in your website, I saw that talk about in terms of Naver's business, AI, robotics, mobility, other future technology. What is Naver doing about this business now?
Yes. So Naver also, regardless of, today we spend about 25% of our revenue on R&D every year.
Wow.
Right. So that's
a huge number.
that's a mass, right?
Massive,
That's
yeah.
a massive number, right? And it's across various businesses, but I also want to highlight that. So Naver Labs is our, we have two R&D kind of initiatives. One is on the AI side, which is part of the Naver Clova business, which, we have our own, we call it Clova. It's kind of like Siri, right? It's kind of the AI product that we're developing. And also that will be an important part of our cloud service business. The other initiative is robotics. And that was also an early initiative that we're investing into. We run a large R&D center on that. And it's really kind of the, how do you call it? Kind of the micro mobility, where in our new building, we have our own developed robots that will come and deliver packages to each person's desk, right?
Oh, okay.
And that's something we're working on, because we feel that, that will become an important part of micro mobility, or that the last mile delivery piece of e-commerce in the future.
Interesting.
We also bought a couple years ago Xerox's R&D center. So Xerox had an R&D center in France. They do AI and robotics, and we had acquired that a couple of years ago, and so we also have an R&D function in Europe.
When I worked for General Electric, my first job was a corporate BD, so I understand what you're doing. But would you explain what is your responsibility under your current role, and then what is your current focus in terms of geographic market, sectors, and business model you're interested in?
Right. So business development is it's a broad area where we focus a lot on making strategic investments, M&A, and then trying to build corporate partnerships with other companies. And so, we had just announced I think it was Naver's largest acquisition to date, which was we had acquired the largest web novel platform. It was based in Canada. We paid more than $600 million for it. It's called Wattpad.
Wow, that's a big deal.
It was a huge deal, and the intent was to build out we thought there would be lots of synergies with our Webtoons business in North America, because Webtoons and web novels are adjacent products, and that would just build out our portfolio of digital content globally. So for example, that was a big project that we had helped source and execute. The day-to-day, we continue to seek strategic investments, whether they're controlling stakes, minority stakes. Our day-to-day activities is, we're on the phone from early morning talking to bankers, startup founders in North America, Europe, Japan, all over the world. And we also work on corporate partnerships, whether they're joint ventures. Naver had recently entered into a partnership, strategic alliance with the CJ Group, and also the eMart Group in Korea, where we had exchanged equity in a share swap, as well as entered into a business alliance. And so those are also things that our team had helped execute. And so, those are kind of the things that we focus on a day-to-day basis.
That's true. People always talk about the low-hanging fruit, like ride-hailing, food delivery, e-commerce, fintech in every part of the world. Which vertical do you think will experience the explosive growth in the next couple of years post-pandemic?
That's an interesting question. All of those sectors that you mentioned will definitely experience explosive growth, and they continue to do that. E-commerce and fintech is what Naver is deep into. Fintech also, So it's a very important part of our business because Naver Pay is the largest payment solution in Korea. We own 44% of the market in Korea, right? It's very important for our e-commerce business because it gives our online shoppers and our online merchants a solution that helps them to buy, consume more and sell more on our platform. And so that will grow hand in hand alongside e-commerce, I think, in any market. Mobility is something that we have not yet gotten into. I know Kakao has invested a lot into it in terms of Kakao mobility in Korea. That too, will ride hailing and food delivery are expected to grow very rapidly, and the pandemic, I think, only accelerated that. People now have realized that it's so much more convenient to order food from home. It's so much more convenient to rely on ride hailing or even e-commerce to do even your grocery shopping from home. And so fresh food and grocery sales online and delivery I believe will become an even more important part of people's daily lives. And that's why you saw why the Coupang IPO was so successful recently.
That was actually very surprising to me, to everyone, right? The valuation they got in terms of market cap. Yeah,
that's right.
Right.
That's right.
How do you perceive the culture of Naver? Do you think that Naver is more like a conglomerate in terms of culture, or the still startup?
No, it's very different from a conglomerate. So, I have, as a banker, I had covered, my clients had been, all of the large conglomerates in Korea. As a private equity investor, I had done deals across from and alongside all of the Korean chaebols. And I'm just very surprised and very pleased to see that Naver is just so different. It's the opposite of a conglomerate. It's a very flat organization. The CEO of Naver, the founder of Naver, will be in a meeting with a non-executive, a low-rank employee, just 2 or 3 of them discussing something, right? There's no hierarchy. I can get decisions approved, whether it's related to an M&A transaction or investment, just by, we use Line internally to send messages to each other, but I can message my CEO and get approval to, hey, the other side wants to change these terms. Let's just change it. And it happens real time. And you can never imagine that would happen in a Korean conglomerate, right?
Right.
In a Korean conglomerate, just to meet your CEO of a large company or your owner, your founder, it might take you several weeks to set up that meeting.
Right.
But Naver is just completely different. So it still has that startup mentality where people are very humble. They actually don't realize how big they've become and how important and dominant they've become. Because they're much larger other than Samsung and SK, they're much larger than any other Korean conglomerate. But the people just don't yet realize that, which I find mind-boggling.
Right. That's very impressive. That's actually very hard, even though the management member or the owner or founder of the company try to keep the like a startup culture flexible, creative, innovative, which is very hard. Once you scale the business, hired a lot of people, communicating thousands of people, everybody focus on the building and the running a process, right? Oh, that's very amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. My conclusion to date is, my own opinion is that this isn't something you can do. You can intend to do. It's something that it's a mindset, and I think the people here have a mindset that bureaucracy and hierarchy just is not important, and they don't care about it, and that all they care about is executing and getting stuff done. And age, seniority, how many years you've worked at the company, whether you're a female or a male. I also want to make that point. It just does not matter at all. So Naver, if you think about it, our CEO is a woman, which means that two of the C-suite are women. Our general counsel is a woman. The head of our largest division, which is our e-commerce division, is a woman. So more than half of the top 10 executives are women. But the more interesting part of it is that no one realizes that. It just isn't important. It just doesn't cross anyone's mind. And so I think that's
That
the
sounds.
strength. Yeah.
Yes, I feel the same way. If people talk about gender inclusion, diversity, or racial inclusion, which means that they have a lot of problem, right?
Exactly. Anyone who emphasizes it means it's not working for them.
Yeah, it's not working. Yeah, you're right.
Right.
If it is working, they should not talk about that. I mean, even about that term word, right?
Right. Right.
But that's very, very impressive. I didn't know that about all those things about the Naver. I think I will admire Naver and people who are working at the Naver more than from now. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so then you don't have a problem, even though you acquired the startup technology company. I mean, your team, and then
Right.
integrate those business with the Naver. You don't have that problem. It's a typical negative synergy between the large corporation and the startup, right? Like we have
yeah, that's a very good question. So uh, it'll be a very big challenge. I think integration, M&A, for Asian countries, I want to say, Asian countries do not have a good track record there, right?
Yeah,
so if you think
I
about
agree.
it, right? So Chinese companies rarely acquire outside of Asia. Korean companies, I want to say, the past acquisitions, I haven't seen a single success case, right? Samsung
Agree.
had failed a lot of times. Where they succeeded were the times where after they acquired, they are the times where they tried not to integrate. They just let them do, continue to do what they do. The Japanese companies back in the 80s and 90s acquired a lot in North America. I think they all failed. The only one maybe that succeeded was probably Sony Pictures, right? Which is still doing well as part of the Sony organization. So I think Asian companies are very, very bad at M&A. They're very bad at integration. They're very bad at retaining the people. And I think it's because my thesis is that my hypothesis is that it's because they tried to impose an Asian culture onto the target company, which, especially today with all these startups, even a Google or an Amazon cannot do that, right? I mean, you have to acknowledge that they were special, that they've done, something unique, and that they will continue to have a startup mindset. Whereas today, Google and Amazon have become these giants, right? And so I think even American companies find integration, buying out startups to be challenging. And I think that our recent Wattpad acquisition, that too, I think will be a challenge for us. But it will be, something we'll have to figure out.
Yes. People say that the Asian culture or Korean culture are very strong. So that's why also that I worked and live outside of Korea a very long time and then work in the 6 Asian country, working for the bank or finance company joint venture. But what I observe or witness is like Korean expat management member who work in those countries, they don't really try hard to communicate the local employee. I mean, in a local way, right? Just looks like they're disconnected. That's I think a huge challenge for the Korean or Asian company, I guess.
I agree. I just think that they're not as culturally perceptive to the foreign cultures. I think that's kind of one of the bigger challenges that Asian cultures have.
Yeah. Then what is your advice to them if you have a chance to have a conversation with the CEO or top management of large Korean company who plan to expand to the other part of the world, Europe, Asia. Do you have, based on your experience, do you have any advice to share with them?
I really think it's about, so I think a lot of times the Japanese companies of the 90s, the Korean company, the Samsungs, the Hyundai, they do a very good job at organization. They do a very good job of running a process, a very meticulous,
yes,
right? A very meticulous, very well managed process. I think what they are not good at doing is managing people. But the interesting thing is startups and the new economy is more and more about, I think it's more and more about people, right? I mean, that's what venture capital is. Venture capital invests not in factories or hard assets or processes. They invest in people. And the way to have, successful integration and inorganic growth is to figure out how you're going to manage that founder who created that business, how you're going to recruit the best talent to manage that business and give them the power to empower them, provide them the resources to do it. You have to trust them. You have to trust them. You have to give them guidance and parameters, but you have to trust them and find the best people to run the business. I think Asian cultures and Asian corporations aren't as good at, I think, the recruiting part of it, especially when it comes to foreign cultures. They just don't trust foreigners. They want to send their own people, but to do business in a foreign country, you need the local people to do it. And I think spending much more time on recruiting and developing those personal relationships with the people on the ground is what I would advise.
Yes, yeah. I think you're right about that. When I work at General Electric, they have an interesting process. They call it the assimilation. So when they have a new CEO in the local company or the top management from the headquarters or Europe, so there exists a culture difference between the management member and the local employee. They have a program to get the new management member assimilated into local culture and the local office. I think that is a quite interesting idea to try. Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, like the GEs of the world, the IBMs of the world have been acquiring companies for the past, 200 years, right? And so they
Right.
definitely, know how to do that very, very well.
Right. Agree. Yeah. So last question is, what can we expect from you and Naver this year? And what is your long-term goal of your professional journey? You plan to try another profession going forward?
Well, to answer the first question, so for Naver, global growth is the theme for this year and will be for the next few years, right? So we have a big business, a Webtoons business, and now the web novels business through our acquisition in North America. We've invested more than $300 million into Europe. We have a big stake in Spain's largest classified business. It's a C2C marketplace called Wallstreet. We also have investments in various other marketplaces in Europe. And so Europe and North America are two important areas for Naver to grow. Japan so we recently combined Line with SoftBank's Yahoo Japan. So we have a 50-50 JV where Naver and SoftBank own Line and Yahoo Japan together. We feel that will be a very, very powerful partnership. And we hope that will become the dominant commerce player in Japan. So Japan is also.
Yeah, I believe it is. Yeah, very powerful.
Right.
Alliance.
Right. So Japan and Southeast Asia are also very important growth markets. So global growth, innovation, expansion into new businesses will be the target, the strategy for Naver for the next several years. Korea, obviously we'll continue to do what we do very well in Korea, but as you mentioned before, there's a lot of political and a lot of competition in Korea. We probably prefer to spend that energy outside of Korea in a much larger market. Your second question, my personal goal, I still have no idea what I'll be doing in the next few years.
Yeah.
You know,
I know the life doesn't pan out as you planned. That is true. It's very true.
right. You know, I really hope to be able to help and see Naver become an even more dominant player in the global market. And I think people are now realizing and recognizing the Naver brand and name in countries like the United States or various countries in Western Europe. And so I really hope to be able to be part of that and help the company grow even further outside of Korea.
I got you. Yeah. Thank you very much for taking time to sharing your story and then talk about the Naver and the Naver's plan to grow the business internationally. Thank you so much.
Not at all. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, share with a friend, and drop me a review. Bye.